Welcome to Medicine. We have a very special guest today to talk with us about how to be a great mom, an ER doctor and family medicine practicing doctor. Dr. Waters comes to us with 3 years of ER experience, is working in clinic, all in rural southern Illinois, where she came back to work with her husband on a huge farm and be around his family to help out with the kids, because the only way to get the balance is to have people to help with those kids, from 5 kids, 7 months old to 19 years old. You have your hands really full.
I do. I do.
How do you balance all of that?
Oh, goodness. Well, again, a lot of it's just kind of taking it day by day. We do have multiple calendar schedules that we try to balance.
Electronic or paper?
Technically both.
Yeah.
So I use a paper calendar, and I usually write on it with a pencil. And then I'll take screenshots of that so I can text it to people who help us with our family, whether it's the nanny or grandparents or friends, etc. So, and then if I have to make any changes, I can erase, the pencil and retake the, photo or whatever. So.
A lot of juggling.
Yeah, it is, definitely.
So you have a 7-month-old. How was going through med school, residencies crazy?
Yeah, I actually had a baby in each.
Oh, wow.
So I had a baby my last year of medical school, a baby my last year of residency, and then my youngest son was born in September of last year.
That sounds really, really challenging.
Yeah. So some might, even say, maybe it's because my husband's a saint and he puts up with my crazy schedules and is willing to jump in there and help with caring for him and whatnot. But no, really, I think it's because we have a really strong nuclear and also extended family. We're really, really blessed in that regard, where every member of the team kind of chips in and does what they can do to help out. When things don't always go according to plan, just kind of having the grace to accept it, move on, acknowledge it, and being really resilient to bounce back from that.
Those are like ER doctor skills. And just surviving medicine skills.
Yes, yeah,
Being
exactly.
resilient, agile.
Exactly.
So do you have your kids start with chores like really young?
Yeah. So again, it just kind of starts just with really basic things. Even our son who just turned 3, like one of the most basic skills is when he's getting ready to take a bath. And he's trying to undress himself, those clothes go in the hamper. So something just as basic as that is super helpful. And obviously, if they're not going to be able to make their bed perfectly because they're a toddler, that's fine, but at least try. Right? Try to the best of your ability as much as you can, and kind of go from there.
That makes a lot of sense.
Mm.
You're building future leaders and well-disciplined kids.
They're not always saints, let me tell you that.
No. It's impossible. None of us are always saints.
Yeah. I think it is really helpful though, because obviously, even though there are 5 biological children, each one is very unique. Each one is so unique personality wise. And so I think that's super helpful. It just gives you another kind of aspect of being able to work with people and start to understand kind of human nature.
I agree. I have 6 kids, and they also all have very different personalities and teach us a lot of things.
Oh, yeah.
Last night, my youngest, who's 7 years old, not 7 months, was praying and thanking God for our one daughter because of her dog, which makes everyone happy. And we just all cracked up because
Nice.
we were like, we didn't think about thanking God for her because of the dog. But it's just this fun perspective and seeing the world in a different way, and then helps me stand in other people's shoes as well a little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what's the hardest thing trying to juggle shifts or being away for 24-hour shifts in these critical access hospitals and trying to manage things at home too?
Yeah, probably making sure that the kids kind of have a little bit of a heads up of where I'm going and why. Some of the younger Kiddos, obviously the baby doesn't know why I'm gone, but even the 3-year-old now understands, like, when I'm not there at bedtime, it's because I'm helping other people who are sick, you know? And so being able to kind of prepare them for that is helpful. And then usually we try to have some special like activity kind of going on that they're already kind of looking forward to so that they don't miss me as bad. But probably like the hardest thing that we've encountered with me being gone is when there's like really bad weather. And so usually, you know, it's hard for me. I mean, obviously, I'm concerned about them at home, but usually it's the opposite. My husband's usually just praying that, you know, a tornado doesn't hit the hospital and we have like a mass casualty and just
Right.
et cetera, et cetera. Again, he's got a military background, so he usually already jumps to like worst case scenario. But otherwise, you know, that's really been kind of the greatest struggle is just kind of making sure that I'm safe where I'm at and they're safe as well. So,
So how do you feel like you're able to build like a long-term resiliency to missing your kids and being gone? Because you're not doing just clinic anymore, where you're 9 to
right.
5 and a couple ER
Yeah, I
shifts.
think what probably helped tremendously was a couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to change my work schedule from 4 days of clinic a week to just two. And I was able to finagle that not just with my employer, but I mentioned before I'm a National Health Service Corps scholar. And so I have that commitment also to the community at large to fulfill that service obligation. And they were okay with me doing that as well. And so that's really helped give me a little bit of flexibility so that I have clinic like mostly Mondays and Tuesdays. And then every now and then I'll pick up a 24-hour ER shift a couple times a month. So truly, in the sense of the word, I'm part-time for each. And so that kind of helps balance a little bit of the quantity. And then what's been really awesome about ER is being able to plan the shifts out, ideally a couple months in advance. And so that's been super helpful. So like when I had my maternity leave, that wasn't as big of a deal because we already knew a few months ago, hello, you know, I'm going to have a baby at the end of September, you know, I'm going to need a little bit of time to kind of recoup. And so that was nice to be able to kind of have that break in October just to be at home. And then I feel pretty blessed that because I do live in the area, if there is a last minute dire need, oh my gosh, you know, we've got to have somebody, I am able to get there quickly and pick up shifts last minute if need be. And so I was able to do that at the end of December. And so that kind of helped balance things out.
It's amazing. I mean, so it sounds like super mom because you're doing managing 5 kids, farm stuff, you're doing clinic for underserved area, you're working in critical access hospital where you're all by yourself managing mass casualty sometimes, trauma patients,
Mhm.
and it's just you as the doctor. And then you're popping in and just helping out and doing shifts every once in a while when there's a big emergency. It's
Yeah.
pretty amazing.
You know, I really feel like I've always just tried to make the most of opportunities when they've come up in life. I was raised by really awesome parents and also was super close with my mom's parents, my grandparents. And work ethic was such a huge thing. You always give it 100% and be kind. You know, so I mean, those are the two things that I think are really, really helpful for, you know, being able to help other people. There have been times when I've started noticing, wait a second, you know, I'm getting stretched a little too thin, you know, I need to take a little time out, you know, kind of regroup. I feel like as I've gotten older, I've picked up on that sooner. And that's kind of been helpful just to kind of also balance when I feel like my energy level is starting to kind of wane so that I can kind of recharge. And, you know, again, it's been helpful because with ER, you have that flexibility to kind of titrate your time a little bit
Yeah.
more so than perhaps other types of medicine.
I really like that. Like, give 100%, be kind, and then figuring out your own self, knowing when you're starting to fray,
Yeah.
and then being good about saying no.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel also like I've been really, really blessed to also encountered really strong mentors. You'll often hear people like make remarks, oh, God will put that person in your life. It may only be for a fleeting moment, but there is a, higher reason kind of thing. I definitely think in hindsight, there were times he placed certain people that needed to be able to kind of give me whatever pearl or piece of advice to kind of keep me on the path he had for me, which again, there were a lot of times I thought I was on the right path, but I wasn't.
Yeah. That happens a lot in life.
So,
We man plans and God laughs. Yes.
yeah. So,
So how did you mentioned mentors, like
mhm.
how do you stay in contact with mentors right now?
Yeah. So, one of the things I'm pretty quick to let people know is I quickly realized in my early days that I probably wasn't going to have enough time to accomplish things I wanted to if I did social media or Facebook.
Yeah.
So, like, I really stay away from Facebook. So, a lot of times when I reach out to them, it's like personal, like cell
Yes.
phone, like I'm texting or I'm calling them or I'm sending them an email, that kind of thing. I feel like that's a more authentic way of communicating with people. And I feel like, in and of itself, them trusting me with their personal contact information is also kind of symbolic of that as well. So that's primarily the main way. And then occasionally I'll see them in person. And that's always really fun to kind of be able to touch base because, like you mentioned, when you're usually the only doctor in a small little hospital, sometimes that can be really alienating and really being able to kind of reach out to people who are more experienced, more knowledgeable, or sometimes it's a personality thing. Obviously, I'm not perfect. Nobody is, but sometimes like, wait a second, I really ought to ask Dr. So-and-so because I think he would have a different take on how I handled this situation. And I'm curious what that would be.
So a couple things pulling out from there is staying in contact with people. Have a lot of time to do all these things because you're not on social media
Correct.
and wasting time
Absolutely.
and doom scrolling. And then also your look for growth. You're like, how should I handle this differently? And not just the fixed mindset of I handled it wrong, so therefore I'm a terrible person. It's like, I learned something,
Yeah.
time to grow.
Exactly. And I feel like a lot of times it's sort of like when you have that gut feeling, I feel like I could have maybe done this a little bit better. I wonder what I could have done. It's almost like you may not know exactly what needed to be done, but you know that you need to search for that and figure out, how to, be as good as you possibly can be in your job, knowing that you're never going to reach perfection, but at least continuing to strive towards that. And that's one of the things I feel like is really interesting about medicine because it constantly things are constantly evolving and constantly changing. The technology in and of itself has made huge strides just in the past 10 years. So that constantly, I feel like, kind of challenges me.
Oh yeah, medicine is a challenge. We were talking earlier
Mhm.
about COVID and just like every hour there was
Oh,
something.
absolutely. Yeah. And
Yeah.
COVID, I really feel like in hindsight, it wasn't just the technical aspects of medicine, but like the emotional, psychological, spiritual, like one of the things, and I felt really blessed that my medical school had so many resources to help provide training, hands-on training, clinical simulation training. They brought healthcare professionals in to do debriefings after patient cases with our mannequins. I mean, just like nothing was spared with that. But the one thing that I vividly remember when they were trying to teach us how to break bad news was for that to always be in person. And during COVID, we were having to do it over the phone.
Yeah. Over the phone while masked up and muffled and yeah,
Yeah.
that was hard.
That was very hard. And so having I feel like also like emotional resilience to kind of bounce off of that and realize, listen, that was just a temporary thing. Life here on earth, just kind of a fleeting moment kind of thing. You just got to make the most of it and just move on.
Yeah. So with all of the like you're full of good advice, but what would you tell a young female med student, resident who's going along this path? Maybe not the exact, they're going into emergency
Yeah.
medicine
Yeah.
or they're doing family medicine and they want to start a family or just getting started.
Yeah. I think what was helpful for me was to try to find older and or more experienced physicians that I wanted to emulate that already kind of balanced what I wanted my life to look like because I was a non-traditional student and already had a couple of kids before I started medicine. I feel like on one end that was actually easier for me because I knew that I already wanted that as part of my life. I remember I did a trauma rotation with a female surgeon who knew right away she and her husband did not want to have children. And so it made her realize that that was why, part of why she wanted to go into trauma surgery so that she could really give it 100%, and still be able to balance the time for her husband, et cetera, et cetera. But I remember her really, telling Nicole, are you sure you don't want to go into trauma surgery? I'm like, where would I have time for my
Right,
kids?
exactly. You don't want
There's
to be on call all
only
the time.
24/7, 365. There is no other time. And so I think, like I said, I was blessed in some regards to have already started a family before then. But the advice, like I said, I would give other young females is just try to find somebody that already kind of has a life that you kind of want to emulate.
Yeah.
Then hopefully be able to establish a relationship with them so that they can kind of talk you through different things.
I like that a lot. And that is where we grow, where our kids are growing too, emulating us. And prioritizing family for you has
Oh,
led to,
absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, people often ask me, why did you go into medicine? You have, degrees in bioengineering and a PhD in biology. Like, why did you go into medicine kind of thing? And I feel like for me, a lot of it is just deeply rooted in the fact I grew up the oldest of five. And so before my first childhood memory, I was always a big sis. And part of, I feel like my identity growing up and then my personality was always caring for my younger siblings. And then when they got hurt or ill, just kind of sliding in there, kind of being a second mom type of thing. And I feel like a whole lot of kind of my soft skills in medicine, I actually have been working on for
like,
close to 40 years.
yeah,
So, that definitely I think has kind of translated over as well.
makes sense. Do you see anything right now as you're practicing in clinic, in healthcare in general, in
Mhm.
systems or in the ER, where you feel like there's still some real difficulties for women to be in medicine or practicing in healthcare?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because a lot of times, you know, people will ask me about work-life balance, and I'll kind of joke and say, well, I have the perfect work-life balance. I only live with men, and in the clinic, I only work with women. With that being said, I have often wondered if it actually has helped me being older before pursuing medicine because on one hand I feel like I can identify very well with the staff because a lot of our kids are the same ages or they go to the school and whatnot to kind of have that rapport, but sometimes that can blur the lines of authority, and so I have to be kind of careful about like balancing that. And so one of the things I really really try hard to do with my leadership style is be firm but gentle, and sometimes that's super hard
It's really hard
when
to
you have a
balance.
patient who's coded and you're trying to resuscitate or whatever,
Yeah.
sometimes it's really, really hard to be firm but gentle when it's such a high stakes clinical situation.
Do you feel like the nurses and like new nurses look at you differently as a woman? How do you get around that or overcome that?
A lot of it is, I feel like, understanding the team dynamics. And as a physician, you're naturally the leader of the team, but we really don't get a whole lot of formal leadership training in medical school. I'll be honest with you, my husband has been extremely, extremely supportive with helping me through certain team dynamic situations because he's retired military.
Yeah.
He was an Army officer, 22 years of service, and so one of the things that he has taught me is even though you're working with a team of people and you're the officer and they're maybe enlisted, you still have to respect that NCO that's been there for 30 years.
Yeah.
And if they're giving you the heads up, hey, you want to maybe consider A, B, and C, we probably need to consider A, B, and C,
Yeah.
and then kind of move from there. And then really because of the blessing of having the formal education and training, being willing to have a conversation with, you're recommending A, B, and C. It's interesting because if we actually, maybe think through kind of the explanation of maybe an alternative thing, they may be able to have a conversation where they didn't realize that it may actually be easier to do X, Y, and Z.
So just that communication.
Yeah, that communication. And like I said, sometimes that's super challenging when you do have somebody who is older and they've been in a certain job or position a lot longer than you have in your respective field, just trying to balance that out. And so really I try to come after it with, being open-minded to what their suggestions are, but also kind of making sure things are evidence-based with the care that we're providing and being a teacher, basically.
We're always teaching in medicine as doctors and just teaching our patients and teaching the team.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell me a little bit about your path of like why you chose family medicine and then you started working in the ER, moonlighting as a resident. And then where would you suggest young med students look towards as they're like, what specialty should I go into?
Oh gosh. So for me personally, I think it was a lot more straightforward because I knew I wanted to stay in a rural area. And I had a couple of mentors that were kind of a jack of all trades. Like my family physician still delivered babies she was like the last family doc standing in Cape Girardeau delivering babies kind of thing. And so I really liked the variety of her clinical practice. And then coming from an ortho research background, some of the physicians I worked with were coming from family medicine, sports medicine. So I thought that was kind of interesting as well. And then one of my really strong mentors and residency was a family physician who still worked ER. And I met a lot of those guys who were traditionalists. And one of the things that they had advised me was because of how medicine was evolving, if I really, really liked procedures and knew I was going to be going back to a rural area, which Johnson County doesn't even have a critical access hospital. Like there's no hospital there. But that picking up ER shifts would be a really good way to make the most of my skills and aptitudes and really be a most service of the area.
Oh, it is a huge service. There's so many doctors that don't want to work in rural ERs because it's definitely harder to not have special.
For sure. And sometimes, I think about the trajectory of my kind of professional career or training. And it kind of seems like there were times where I kind of wiggled off the path or circled back on, but I've always really wanted to help people. And then again, like I mentioned before, growing up, being the oldest of 5, caring for my younger siblings. I previously mentioned both my parents having very bad osteoarthritis at a young age. That was really powerful motivators for me to, go into medicine.
I love it. I feel like, so we've covered a lot of things. Not only are you super mom, but you have a lot of really good advice, getting mentors, giving 100% and being kind. You're very altruistic, and that's such a great motivator. You're prioritizing family and went into family medicine to be able to serve the rural community that really needs you and in critical access hospitals where you get to do fun stuff and hard stuff. Although fighting with insurance companies is probably harder sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Don't even get me started on insurance. Even yesterday in clinic, I had a patient who was self-pay. and he came in for just screening labs. And he was really concerned because of his family history of cancer. At any rate, so just talking to him about different labs, including genetic testing that we could do at the end of offering these different labs, he was like, well, how much do you think that's going to cost? But what I will promise you and what I would recommend is let me print out a paper copy of this and we will work with you on seeing what the lowest rate is that we can offer, but you could also shop around and see.
A lot of logistics in
Oh my
this.
gosh,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, you do logistics in family, do logistics in
Mhm.
critical access ERs, trying to get patients transferred to the right place, and then your clinic just going around all of these difficulty. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today.
You're welcome.
Loved it. And thank you for all that you're doing.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.